work fine.
Practicing since 2.
It always works over here.
Mine's working.
You want me to take over?
No.
Mine's working, yeah.
Nope. You're on now.
They've restored service. Somebody paid the bill. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. And that was curious the way it wouldn't work, and then it did. We have regrets from Councillor Knoll and Councillor Lapworth and Councillor Robinson, and we few, the remainder, will handle the agenda tonight, nevertheless, despite the missing confreres. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest on the agenda tonight? I don't see any, not even from our frequent flyers. So I'm going to turn now to a request that we resolve into committee of the whole. And as you know from long practice, thank you. Moved by Councillor O'Meara, seconded by Councillor Giddings. All in favor? You are catching up on this. We need motions and seconds, so that's very good. Now, your first item on the agenda is the consent item. And a consent item means that we don't think there's a controversy involved and that we don't need a big discussion because it's minor. Let's find out.
No, I'd be pleased to move it. This is just there's no issues here at all.
The consent
Everything's
item
been
is
done.
moved by Councillor Elgar. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Good agenda making. The next item is item number 2, the public hearing item. And this is the public meeting and recommendation report for North Oakville zoning bylaw housekeeping amendment, accessory buildings and structures in all zones and public park uses outside the park zone. And this is a report from the Planning Services Department. Now, we have a presentation for the benefit of those who watch at home or over the internet. I assure you the councillors have all read this, but let's start off with the presentation.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. As mentioned, this is a town-initiated North Oakville zoning bylaw housekeeping amendment, and this is a public hearing. This amendment primarily deals with accessory buildings and structures, but also it aims to set out or specify regulations that apply to public park uses outside of the park zone. And just quickly, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment adds a definition of grade to the North Oakville zoning bylaw. It modifies the existing definition of established grade. It changes the permitted height for accessory buildings and structures and how their height is to be measured. So as an example, a backyard shed will now be a maximum permitted height of 4 meters instead of 4.5 because it's now being measured from grade, which is the grade at the shed, instead of established grade, which is the center, generally speaking, of the front lot line. And then we've added a maximum overall height regulation for accessory buildings and structures in the park zone, the stormwater management zone, and the institutional zone. And then this bylaw, as I mentioned earlier, also specifies that permitted public parks outside of the park zone, because they are permitted in all zones in North Oakville except the NHS, are to be subject to the regulations of the park zone, because that was a missing piece before in the zoning bylaw. So notice of this was published in the Oakville Beaver October 6th. I've had no inquiries or comments, and I think that's because the scope of the bylaw is so limited, and that's why we opted not to have the public information meeting, and instead of just having this public meeting tonight. And really, this bylaw is intended to improve the North Oakville zoning bylaw for its implementation and use by staff and the public. So we're recommending that bylaw 2016-108 be passed.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gilwoods. Are there questions? Are there members of the public with information for the council on this matter? Is there a motion? Councillor Hutchins moves the staff recommendation. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that is adopted. Now we come to number 3, the discussion item, and this is the recommendation report for the draft plan of condominium Dunbar Homes. And I'm looking to see... there's Trish Collingwood now. So could you summarize this, please, for the public?
You want me to summarize it instead of the presentation?
Oh, no, I meant give us a...
I was going to say, I can do that.
Was that any form of wishful thinking or hopeful thinking? No, I was taking the presentation as the summary.
Okay, perfect. It will be. Thank you, Mayor Burton. The report can be found on page 13 of tonight's agenda. The purpose of this report is to present the recommendation on the draft plan of condominium application submitted by Dunbar Homes for 2158 to 2192 Trafalgar Road. The intent of the draft plan of condominium are to establish condominium tenure for the development of the 112 townhomes to allow the transfer of individual units to the future owners. The subject lands are located at 2158 to 2192 Trafalgar Road on the east side of Trafalgar Road between Glen Ashton Drive and River Oaks Boulevard. The area surrounding the site is built out with an existing subdivision on the east side of Trafalgar, a fairly new 51 single-family home subdivision to the east of the subject lands, existing commercial uses to the north, as well as the detached dwelling, a kennel, and a place of worship to the south. The applicant proposes a common element condominium consisting of 112 townhome units, as you can see above. The development has been the subject of a number of planning applications, including a draft plan of subdivision and a zoning bylaw that was heard before the OMB, the Ontario Municipal Board, in April of 2014, and a site plan application which was granted final approval in October 2015. Draft plan of condominium approval and the registration of the plan is the last step of the planning process. The lands are designated Main Street 2 and livable Oakville. Multiple attached dwellings are permitted in this zone or in this designation, and the proposal conforms to the livable Oakville plan. The property is subject to bylaw 2014-062, approved by the OMB, which zones the lands mixed use 2, and the proposed development complies with the zoning bylaw. The townhomes are currently under construction and will have access off of Lillican Street. In summary, the proposed draft plan of condominium will legally create the individual units to allow for the transfer to the ownership of the purchasers. A full circulation of the condominium application has been undertaken, and there were no outstanding financial, legal, or planning issues to be resolved. Public participation for this development occurred with the plan of subdivision, the zoning bylaw, and through the site plan process. Staff put forward the following recommendation as shown: that the Director of Planning Services be authorized to grant draft plan approval to the draft plan of condominium submitted by Dunbar Homes dated December 3rd, 2015, and subject to the conditions contained in Appendix A of the Planning Services report dated October 7th, 2016, and that notice of the Council's decision reflect that no public comments were received by the Planning Department and/or Clerk's Department, and that includes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Are there members of the public with information for council on this matter? Council, are there questions? Councilor Grant.
I'll be willing to move the staff recommendation when the time is appropriate.
It may be.
Then let's go ahead and do that.
Anyone else? Shall I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that carries. That brings us to item number 4, and that's the Downtown Cultural Hub update. And I'd like to call your attention to the report that should be on your desks from the Office of the Mayor, recommending that at the request of the 5 residents associations, we defer this to November 28th's meeting so that they can have the benefit of board meetings before they give us information. Councillor Adams.
Thank you. I'm quite happy to defer the matter, but I think our staff probably have a presentation, and there may be individuals in the audience electronically or physically who might be interested in hearing the presentation in advance of the 28th. Could we hear the presentation if there is one? I'm assuming there is one.
Is there a presentation?
I can always provide a presentation, but there's not a presentation prepared with PowerPoint slides. The mayor had indicated earlier the item was being considered.
Was being deferred. Okay, then is there going to be one on the 28th? Yes. Okay, then that's great. Thank you very much.
Are there any members of the public with information for council on this matter tonight? Did you just move it? I did. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? The matter is deferred. Thank you, Council. That brings us to the item number 5, Bylaw 2016-115. And about this, you have a letter on your desk from Davies Howe Partners, LLP, informing us with their views on the matter. And if you give your attention now, the Planning Director, Mr. Simeone, will walk us through a presentation for the benefit of the public and council, of course, has made a careful study of the report. Mr. Simeoni?
Thank you, Your Worship. Tonight, as indicated, we're here to consider an extension to the interim control bylaw as it applies to the Glen Abbey property here in the town of Oakville. As you know, we were here approximately a year ago having discussions with the landowner's agents about a potential development of the subject lands. And at that time, it was determined a number of studies should be undertaken. Just for the benefit of those that are listening, an interim control bylaw is a tool under the Planning Act which allows a municipality to consider certain studies when an application is presented and they don't feel they have the appropriate planning policy context in place. In this case, the town of Oakville Council decided it was appropriate to pass an interim control bylaw for a period of up to 1 year. Tonight we're considering an extension of that, the main purpose being to completion of the studies that were identified, in addition the associated implementation tools necessary to put the proper policy context in place. So as I indicated, there were 3 studies briefly, and I'll go into them and give you some explanation on where their current status are. They were the urban structure review, the land use, economic and impact analysis, and the cultural heritage landscape study. On the screen now, you're looking at the summary of the urban structure review. For those that aren't aware, the urban structure review is the basis of Livable Oakville or any official plan in the province of Ontario. Thinking of it as a high-level view, we heard at Livable Oakville this afternoon, it's 50,000, 100,000 foot view of the town from way up and seeing what are the big things that we would see. And I like to think of it as something we would see in 100 years from now. Things like the natural assets to the town, the natural heritage systems, major transportation linkages, open spaces, things of that nature. Things that are fundamental and important to the community. And so that study is underway. The status of it is the discussion paper identified as Phase 2 in the report was delivered to Livable Oakville this afternoon. And it's about to embark on a round of public consultation which will further inform that process, coming back to Livable Oakville by the end of the first quarter of next year, we anticipate. The urban structure, once in place, will help us, through the process, identify the Glen Abbey properties and any others that may come up through the process. It's a really important tool and a lens with which we will look at the Glen Abbey property now that that first piece of work has been completed. And the second study that we had to undertake was the land use, economic, and impact analysis. This, again, is moving forward. Essentially, this one was trying to look at the function, the economic function of the Glen Abbey property within the context of the town. What does it mean from an intrinsic value level? What's the economic impact of its operation, and how does that contribute to the fabric of economic life in the town of Oakville? Again, that study is intended to be completed in the first quarter in a draft format, and the work is well underway on that project. The last of the 3 studies, you will recall, was a cultural heritage landscape assessment Phase 2. We cast our minds back to 2014. Town Council identified the need to undertake a cultural heritage landscape assessment for a number of properties in Oakville. And Phase 1 was completed, and Phase 1 identified properties of high value. The high value properties of them, there were 8, with the Glen Abbey property being one of them. Work commenced on that process in the summer of just past, but unfortunately it was determined that the consultant selected had a potential conflict of interest, so that there was a stop and a restart of that process. I can confirm that we've been allowed access to the property this Friday, and the cultural heritage consultant will be undertaking site visits along with representatives of the owner this week. The work plan we've been provided anticipates a draft report within a 20-week time frame, putting us at March of 2017. That does not include the Phase 3 piece, which is contemplated, which is the actual implementation tools, if any, that are necessary for this, any other of the cultural heritage properties. So reminding ourselves that the interim control bylaw allowed us to put a pause on any development on that site while we considered the studies that were necessary. Planning Act allows us to do that. The studies are still underway, but they're not completed at this time. And we're recommending that the report be received today, and the bylaw 2016-115, a bylaw to amend the original interim control bylaw, be passed, allowing us up to a further year to complete the work that we're underway doing and any associated implementation tools.
Thank you, Mr. Planning Director. Council, do you have questions? Are there members of the public with information for council on this item? I understand that we have a registered delegation in the person of Joe Brandt. Mr. Brandt, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you. Worship, councillors, given that OMB is going to rule on the interim control bylaw January 30th, let's start the hearing. Sorry. Okay, given that OMB will review the interim control bylaw on January 30th, 2017, I think I'd like to use this opportunity just to kind of recap how I feel as a taxpayer and resident. So, you may not have heard it in council chambers, but last February 1st, when you passed the interim control bylaw, there was a loud round of applause from the community. The urban structure review, when Glen Abbey was bought by ClubLink, the truth is they bought what was already a historic, purpose-built golf course. This was no farmer's field. They bought the home of the Canadian Open. They bought a flagship golf course, the crown jewel, if you will, among their dozens of more ordinary courses, and they promoted Glen Abbey as such.
Mr. Brandt?
Yes.
The matter that's before us is the extension or not of the interim control bylaw. And while much of what you're saying probably needs to be said, it might not be the time. It might be that it would be better said at a hearing or later. And I wonder if you'd like to think about maybe speaking to whether you support or oppose extending the interim control bylaw.
Well, there's a number of us, I guess, are going to engage with OMB as participants, and I will make those feelings known. I thought I had 10 minutes to basically say whatever I thought was appropriate. And I'm not going to argue with you, fair enough.
I'm trying to help you.
I know.
Okay.
So let me say this. When the council passed the interim control bylaw February 1st, that was a very positive step. There is no way that you cannot do your due diligence. Council needs to do its due diligence, not accept other people's work. So do I support it? 100%. My closing line tonight, which I will come to now to make life easy for everybody, is that I fully support the council in passing the interim control bylaw. Glen Abbey towers above other golf courses that already have heritage designation by a long way. And that information we can share later. But I would urge you and applaud you to pass the extension, even though OMB may let that fall away. That's why it's appropriate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you speaking to the issue that's actually before us tonight. That's very good, very helpful. We don't have another delegation listed that I know of, but it's our tradition to poll the audience. Are there other members of the public with information for council on this matter now? Then I'll turn to council. Is there a motion? Councillor Elgar?
Yeah, I would move the staff recommendation, and I would ask for a recorded vote.
All right. I'll just ask one, I will do that. Before I call the vote, I just, as you were saying that, a question came to me that I thought we might want to ask staff, which is, considering the letter that we have from the solicitors for ClubLink, I thought I might ask, is ClubLink able to participate in the public consultation that's going forward? Are they disadvantaged in any way in terms of the public process, or can they participate as any other member of the public?
Your Worship, through you, to the members of the council, ClubLink, along with any other person in Oakville, can participate fully with this process. I did indicate in my presentation that they've allowed us access to start that formal investigation from a cultural heritage landscape perspective. I'm aware that our Livable Oakville minutes and the information we bring forward is fully public and fully vetted. And I understand representatives of ClubLink have been monitoring those processes to ensure that they remain a participant. There are still other public processes to come as we move forward on these studies, and we'd be certain to ensure that they're advised of them.
Thank you. I think it's important to be clear that council's taking seriously, and staff are too, the need to be objective and to hear all sides. So thank you for that. I'll now call the vote. It's duly moved by Councillor Elgar. To support it, please rise to be named. That'd be Councillor Lischina, Councillor Adams, Councillor Grant, Councillor Elgar, Mayor Burton, Councillor Hutchins, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Dudek, and Councillor O'Meara. And I declare the motion carried. There being no negative votes. Now, Council, before we go to the confidential item, I was wondering if we could do the advisory committee minutes so that there wouldn't be any public matter. We could go into camera without inconveniencing the public by having dealt with all the public matters. So let's skip ahead to number 6, and if I turn to my addendum, we have the minutes of the Livable Oakville Council Subcommittee from October 3rd. I need a motion to receive these. Councillor Adams, all in favor? Opposed, if any? They're received. Excuse me. And then item 7, we have a recommendation that the following recommendation pertaining to items 6B and C of the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee minutes from its meeting on October 25th be approved and the remainder of the minutes be received. And 6B is the Heritage Permit application at 49 Bronny Road, new patio bar and awning pergola. And the recommendation is that the Heritage Permit application for the construction of a new bar, patio, and pergola with awning as revised in the drawing stamped received October 24th, which were distributed at the meeting and as described in the report dated October 12th from Planning Services, be denied. And Council, if it's your wish to approve it, I think for efficiency, Councillor Dudek?
I was going to say, Your Worship, I'd be willing to move the minutes. However, I understand that Councillor O'Meara has a contrary motion in 6B that he wants. So do you want to wait and do it all at once?
I'm happy to take your motion for the minutes. All those in favor?
With the exception of, no,
So with the
6B.
exception, as you
6B.
clarified.
Thank you.
I hope I'm
Okay.
not going too fast. All those in favor, that's carried. Now,
Councillor O'Meara.
it's my view that we need to defeat this and then replace it with a contrary motion. So could I have someone to move this? Councillor Adams. And now I'll call the vote on that. All those in favor? All those against? That's defeated. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to move the staff recommendation for that item. I understand it was a tied vote at committee, and I think staff recommended the proper course of action. And in talking with my council colleagues who were at that meeting, there appeared to potentially be a little bit of a punitive measure on that, and I think it's always important we separate that aspect from what the permits sort of ask in terms of a heritage designation. So I think the applicant has gone through the process properly now, and as such, I'd ask for my council colleagues' support in approving the staff recommendation on that item.
Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate Councillor O'Meara's description of it. No offense, I'd like to hear from staff in terms of not the full presentation, but what was requested and the basis behind their recommendation.
Councillor Dudek.
Thank you. I will give Susan an opportunity, as Councillor Giddings had requested, but at the appropriate time, maybe I can shed some light on the discussion that took place at the committee table.
Right, because you are a representative of council on that committee, along with Councillor Hutchins. Ms. Shepherd.
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of council. Without going through the whole presentation, a summary would be that the applicant did complete work on the property without proper heritage permit approval. There has been a charge laid under the Ontario Heritage Act, and that is being dealt with according to due process through our Legal Services Department. In the meantime, the applicant was required to submit a heritage permit application, and they have done so. Staff did review the heritage permit application against our adopted standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places, as well as the contents of the heritage designation bylaw, and found that they were appropriate for the property as there are no impacts directly to the heritage features. And that is why staff recommended that the heritage permit application be approved.
Thank you. That's quite a good report. Councillor Giddings, are you satisfied? Councillor Duddick.
Thank you. Susan, I wonder if you can, because there was some discussion that took place at the committee table in regards to what you had indicated regarding the process for the charges being laid. The charges that are being laid are not the decision that is made, but rather the fact there was no due process, i.e. the filing of a heritage application on a Part 4 property. Is that correct?
Through you, Your Worship, that is entirely correct. The charges are because there was not a heritage permit at that time.
Okay. So maybe if I can just give some insight, like Councillor O'Meara had made reference, it was a tie vote. There was considerable discussion in regards to reference to the previous situation and the charges. And we were reminded, not only by the chair, Mr. Bucknell, but also by staff, that our decisions should not be punitive in nature, but should be recognizing the merits of the application that's before us. I can't comment on why some of the ones who were not supportive. I do know that for some people there was reference to they've still had a bit of bad feelings regarding the previous application. But I did support staff's recommendation at committee, and I will support it this evening as well.
Thank you very much. Are there others? I'll just say that Ms. Shepherd said the single most important thing for my ears, which is we required them to make a permit application, and they passed. So it would seem a little bit cruel, if not capricious, to then turn around and say, no, sorry. So now we have... I'm coming to that. So now, are there members of the public here with information for council who'd like to present any information to council? Mr. Connell, does that include you?
Yes. I know he pushed a button. Oh, is it on? Great. So good evening, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Michael Connell. I'm legal counsel with Warefolds, and I'm here tonight with my client, Michael Mercanti, who is the owner of the property you've been discussing. And I can skip all the way back to the second page at the bottom because you've already turned your minds to the issue I wanted to draw your attention to, which is that a application for a heritage permit is supposed to be made on the basis of the strength of the heritage planning opinion. It not only ought not be punitive, but the Conservation Review Board has been very clear that it cannot be punitive. In fact, the Conservation Review Board has said when turning your mind to such applications, you are supposed to proceed as though the offending building were not there. Now that's because there are two separate processes, and the prosecution side of the matter has a different venue, a different decision maker, and a different process. And that process is underway. And no matter the outcome of that process, it actually has no bearing on this application. In fact, as was alluded to, one of the very purposes of bringing prosecution is to compel a member of the public to go through the proper process. So it doesn't make sense then to be punitive when the result of that prosecution is having its effect, which is bringing that person through the proper process to apply for a heritage permit. And so really, I'm here tonight merely to respectfully ask that notwithstanding the recommendation of the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee, that council accept the recommendation of heritage planning staff. And those were my submissions, Your Worship.
You may be about to get your wish, if I read the ice correctly. Any questions for Mr. O'Connell? Thank you, Mr. Sir. So, Kathy, what do you want me to do?
should put this recommendation on the floor. Because that was the recommendation from Heritage.
Right, this is what the councillor just moved.
Oh, okay.
Yes, Councillor O'Meara.
Councilor Miller. Okay.
Okay. So, it's on the floor. Does anybody need it read? Because I'm equipped here, I can read it to you. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that carries. Thank you, everybody. Now, that takes care of, now 6C.
We did that.
You did that, okay. Good, I agree. So I'm going to turn back to the main agenda for the confidential item. And I'm going to ask if council wishes to go into camera for the purpose of receiving advice subject to solicitor-client privilege about a matter of existing or apprehended litigation. And that's moved by Councillor Elgar. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. And we will now excuse the public, and when we're done, we'll come back into public to end the meeting, but there are no other public agenda items before us. All right, council now resumes its public session, having met in camera for the purpose of considering advice subject to solicitor-client privilege about litigation, apprehended or real, and as authorized under the procedure bylaw and the municipal act. And in camera, council has provided direction to staff. It now, if I could ask the clerk, we now need a motion to rise and report to council. Councillor Adams, all in favor? That carries. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent item 1, public hearing item 2, discussion items 3, 4, and 5, confidential discussion item C1, and advisory committee minutes items 6 and 7 as noted by the clerk. A mover and seconder for this report would be appreciated. Councillor O'Meara, Councillor Lischina, all in favor? Opposed, if any? The report is adopted. I'm not aware of any new business. Is there a member with new business? Then is there a motion and a seconder for consideration and reading of bylaws? Councillor Hutchins and Councillor Grant, thank you very much. All those in favor? The bylaws are adopted. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention. This is it's been a longer meeting than some, and it's been great working with you, and we are adjourned.